to pull data from one information system and enter it into another, and it involves a great deal of complexity in terms of the movement of data across the various disparate systems. And as Dan mentioned, multi-site clinical trials is one example in which that's being a challenge. As has been pointed out in the funding programs under comparative effectiveness research, the top priority in terms of infrastructure capacity is the ability to develop information systems that can interface with the healthcare delivery side and enable information to be collected from a variety of sources. The implications for this is that, as Dan mentioned as well, is the time and effort that's required to integrate information to answer research questions, and the time change in which new discoveries of therapeutics, for example, has often been quoted as 17 years from its basic discovery towards the translational and clinical research. This may not be a relevant figure today, but the importance of being able to enhance the speed in which and efficiency in which investments of both the public and private dollar in clinical research takes place is certainly an opportunity at hand for research overall. There's a paper that I've included in your packet that was just published this week by Dan Castro from ITIF that really addresses in a comparative way the aspects of health IT and medical research in the UK and the US. And there are several recommendations in this paper that might be of value to this committee in their work thinking through what the aspects of could be done in terms of health IT and accommodating clinical research. This basically want to mention two features, in that it was indicated that HHS should consider the importance of the secondary use of medical data as it develops interoperability requirements and other standards in its evolving definition of meaningful use, and that will determine how funds are spent from the 2009 stimulus package. And second, that the goal should be to develop a national sharing infrastructure to support health informatics research rather than create isolated project-specific research databases. And I think we're talking about fundamental approaches to the way people think about research projects going forward, and that rather the focus of developing a research database from the standpoint of answering one question, that ultimately the value of that project may be unanticipated years down the way in being able to answer new questions that arrive. This is sort of the paradigm which many of you have already heard about in terms of the context of the learning healthcare system. But at the centerpiece of this is the ability to integrate information from the clinical care side into research questions and then back into impacting on clinical care overall. This is frankly what patients most care about in terms of their participation, is how is new knowledge generated and have impact on the care that follows their participation in it overall. Some of the work that we've been working on has been primarily to address at a fundamental level. This is very basic from the standpoint of how EHR systems can be utilized to support clinical research activities. And the efforts around harmonization of information exchange standards for clinical research in healthcare have to be a centerpiece, although sometimes not the thing that's going to get you on the front page of the newspaper or your moments of fame. However, the harmonization is essential to aggregate sufficient information across partners such that the research findings lead to informed healthcare decisions, and that for timely safety surveillance on a global scale, such information links are necessary. Some of the other areas that are crucial, particularly for therapeutic developers and diagnostics, is the ability to link biomarkers or individual characteristics of genetic markers to population characteristics and outcome. We don't have an infrastructure in our country today that enables that. And then to enable clinicians to perform research concurrent with clinical care. We have a very low rate of participation in this country of individuals in research overall. And with the exceptions in the pediatric oncology world that have often been cited, there's a great deal of opportunity at hand in terms of enabling patients and consumers to participate in a national effort to reduce the time and cost of clinical research and improve the quality and effectiveness of healthcare. It's going to be challenging to do this backwards here, but the real focus of this slide is to demonstrate the importance conceptually of integrating and thinking about the integration of EHR data and in the applications of clinical research is not necessarily as a secondary use, but more primarily involved in the thinking about the potential applications of knowledge gained from the healthcare system. And there will be many discussions coming about from a policy side with regard to HIPAA and many other oversight issues regarding this capability in the future. And but I think fundamentally the one concept here is to not think about these things separately, but as the utility of healthcare information and supporting clinical research is a mindset that we need more thought and consideration of. I wanted to talk just briefly about some of the activities that have transpired within the federal space in partnership with other sponsors with regard to EHR standards harmonization with regard to clinical research. And I want to thank a number of people in the room for their continuity around this, and they are listed here, particularly Becky Cush from CDISC and many sponsors from a variety of different enterprises, and John Glasser for his support as well overall. The components that which this has been primarily focused on is to look at the qualitative value of standards and interoperability of EHR information and supporting research. And we've been trying to characterize that from the standpoint of facilitating subject recruitment and investigator participation, the study data in a standardized format that readily populates reports or publications, standardized data sets for all sponsors, and minimizing the customization efforts that are needed within EHR systems, and the establishment of electronic archives of data at research sites, and the facilitation of regulatory reviews and streamlining submission processes. The work group worked in partnership with ANSI and the HITSB to tackle an EHR clinical research use case, a value case over the last year, and that work has continued. And basically the initial priorities were to establish common data sets for core research data elements that could be readily exchanged from EHRs and clinical research systems. And the long-term objective of this group was to create an infrastructure through which healthcare advances clinical research, which in turn informs clinical care. And we had a substantial involvement from a number of different patient care communities in this overall. So the first scope of the EHR-CR capability statements addresses the following: the core set of research data elements that will be published and utilized and integrated throughout EHR systems overall, and then to support the processes to exchange this data between healthcare and research systems. This is a list of the core data elements. I won't go into any detail about that. The next step in going forward from this activity is the completion of the HITSB process in January 2010. Dr. Halamka and his colleagues have been incredibly supportive of the research space as being an important part of their work. CCHIT Clinical Research Work Group activities in 2009 has been tasked with recommending optimal criteria and test scripts and other certification categories to address the unique needs of data collection and analysis to support clinical trials and other research studies. The meaningful use considerations will be presenting to the policy committee next week in terms of the characterizations and considerations of how clinical research could be utilized in 2013 and 15 under the ARA and high-tech provisions for meaningful use of a EHR overall. And then the additional areas of standards harmonization that we're very interested in continuing work on are the uses of EHRs in addressing patient eligibility and recruitment. We'll hear from Steve on some elements of that. Clinical genomics, safety reporting, and compliance reporting overall. And this final slide really addresses the aspects to which I know Dr. Tang is not here today, but we have been making a number of efforts to try to broaden the tent, if you will, for groups to consider that the applications of meaningful use considerations for EHRs would provide a strategic advantage in terms of enhancing the capabilities for clinical research in the U.S. And these are some of the rationales for why that would be a substantial advancement forward and could comply with the requirements for meaningful use considerations. Thank you very much.
Greg, thank you very much for those cogent remarks. We are now switching online to Mr. Steve Schwartz, who is joining us electronically. Steve, are you there?
I am here.
Okay. We have someone in the room who's going to manage the slides for you, so as you present, if you would just indicate your intention to move to the next slide, we'll have that done here in the room and online. And with that, I'll give it to you for your presentation.
Thanks, Steve, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to present this morning. I unfortunately had a scheduling mix-up and was unable to be there in person, and Steve only asked that I made sure I included my picture on the presentation so you could see what I looked like. So if you would kindly advance to the next slide, we can get past that quickly. The perspective I wanted to give this morning is from the EHR vendor's perspective, which is what are the things that we think about and that we're dealing with as it relates to the adoption of EHRs and how our customers, who are primarily practitioners and medical practices using electronic health records, how they're beginning to leverage EHRs in clinical research, and what are the things that we as vendors are thinking about and having to deal with. There are many challenges that we think about. One, in some ways, EHR vendors are in a unique position to be able to aggregate patient data in a de-identified manner very easily, because we're deploying systems across the country and the data may be housed centrally already, making it very, very easy to become, potentially a research database with all the appropriate permissions. So that building that process in a secure way that enables all of the stakeholders to, provide the appropriate permissions and for us to maintain the privacy is very, very challenging process to navigate through, and yet with the right level of focus and effort on it, it is something that can be done quite practically and quite readily by EHR vendors. So we've done a lot of work in that area at Allscripts, and I know several of the other larger vendors are beginning to provide sources of information and tools to work with the data for the purpose of using it in research. Preservation of data privacy, always very, very high on our minds, and making sure that we do everything in a very, very careful and deliberate manner so that data privacy is maintained. I think managing through the differences between clinical practice and research is something that each EHR vendor goes through somewhat of a learning curve on, because there are pretty dramatic differences between what happens in the patient care process and what happens in a research process, research being a little more of pure science, and patient care being more focused on the patient and trying to cure and improve patient conditions. One of the other things that's apparent at the point of care is that, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in a moment, electronic data capture systems, often referred to as EDC, were systems that were designed because EHRs weren't available at the point of care, to enable researchers and pharma companies to collect information electronically from the point of care. And now that EHRs are being adopted, clinicians and researchers at the point of care they are somewhat overwhelmed by having too many systems to have to deal with, to have to learn, and they want to use one system. So can we make the EHRs connect with EDC systems so information that is available electronically could be passed directly into a research system, and that it all be done in compliance with all the appropriate regulatory rules that apply. So there is a lot of learning and a lot of work being done in that area. And CDISC has been great in fostering some of the standards for being able to pass data from one system to another, and some of the processes to make that easier. There's also the issue of different purchasers. EDC systems are generally purchased by the pharmaceutical or the CROs, whereas the providers are generally the purchasers of the EHR systems. And so how you deploy and how you get these to connect and who pays for the connectivity are all questions that are somewhat complicated at times.